Bring your eyes to a close. And if you're sitting, make sure your feet are touching the ground. And imagine from the bottom of your feet that there's roots that go deep, deep down into the earth, all the way to the molten core, the heart of the earth. And now imagine energy traveling up from the heart of the earth, all the way to the surface, all the way through your feet, up into your heart. Exhale, bringing that energy from your heart up through your throat, all the way up to the top of your head. And then inhale energy from the top of your head, from the sun, and the sun is really just the closest star in the cosmos. So inhale all of that energy from the heart of the heavens, through your head, into your heart. And then exhale, release back down through your feet, back to the earth, releasing all that no longer serves, releasing it back to the earth, knowing that energy is neither good nor bad, it's neutral, and the earth knows she can take it and she can transform it. So then again, inhaling from the earth into your heart, and exhaling from your heart up through your head, up through into the cosmos. And then one more time, bring that energy from the sun and all the stars, the heart of the heavens, down into your heart. Place one hand over your heart and then your other hand on top of that hand. Notice how you feel now, perhaps a little bit more grounded and expanded like a tree. And then not quite yet, but in a moment, you're going to open your eyes. And as you do, imagine it's as if for the first time. So go ahead and open your eyes.
And that was our guest today, Julia Plevin, opening Sacred Space. Julia is our guest. She's an author, speaker, designer. And I'm Linda Lombardo, a voice of Evolution Radio, co-hosting today, along with...
Hi, I'm Todd Lejnieks, and I'm from Edgetalkers.com, and just want to give you a warm welcome, Julia, to our podcast, and mention that I just finished your book on Audible, and I loved your book. It really was like in my own home where I was listening to it, I was doing a forest bathing, going through the whole experience, and I was just enjoying each sentence and each chapter of your book, just like kind of being in the forest. So I really felt like you did a great job conveying the experience in your book, and I really thank you for that gift that I just received from you. I think you mentioned early on what drew you into forest bathing, but I wonder if you can relay that story and why did you get started with this?
Yeah. Well, first, I'm so glad you had that experience with the book. That was really my intention. I called it an armchair forest bath. So whether you read it indoors or if you bring it out into the forest with you, you get the experience of connection just by going through it. So that's really beautiful to hear. And how I got into forest bathing is, I had always been a lover of nature, rock climber, surfer, trail runner, all of that. But it wasn't until I was living in New York City going to design school that I really began to understand the mental health effects of being disconnected to nature. And all of a sudden I saw so many of my personal issues reflected in this lack of connection to nature, the anxiety and the stress. And actually I had been diagnosed with Lyme disease at age 18. So it spent years going, on antibiotics and on seeing so many different doctors, which then led, antibiotics to stomach issues, to anxiety, just kind of this like endless train of chronic disease. And I just never felt totally well. Then I came across this researcher, Glenn Albrecht, called psychoterapia, which is the umbrella term for the mental health effects of being disconnected from nature. And within it, there was just so many terms, and I just loved learning about them. Eco-anxiety, eco-paralysis, solastalgia, which is the loss of solace or a place you never left as it changed. But then being a designer in design school, okay, so this is the problem, but what's the solution? How do we solve this? And no matter what I read, the answer was always the same: reconnect to nature. Reconnect to nature as a way to heal yourself, community, and the planet. And that was around 2014. I began this question of what does it mean to reconnect to nature? So Glenn Albrecht uses the term solophilia. And I actually first tried to start something like a solophilia club. And that wasn't really catching on. People were like, that sounds like a disease. No one wants to do that. And then I came across the Japanese term Shinrin-yoku, forest bathing. And there's something in that word where even if people didn't know what it was, they're like, I want that. And so it became the Forest Bathing Club. And really it started as, this is something that I want to try. Does anyone else want to do it with me? And I started on meetup.com. Being a designer, it's always about prototyping and minimum viable product. So what's the least I can do to test an idea, see if something has legs? Hosted a group on Meetup. Before I knew it, people started to join. I hosted my first forest bath. A reporter from Quartz came. Then, you know, the way that press happens, another reporter covered it. And I was like, these articles are great, but I just spent a year doing research on this. I have so much more I want to say. So I wrote an article on medium.com, and then I think that's how I got the book deal, is the publisher found my article and found this press at the time when forest bathing was really, you know, just about to take off, and asked if I wanted to write a book on it.
So I'm curious, from all of that, creating this process by which you would lead people in forest bathing. And I also want to ask you about the term forest bathing versus forest therapy too in a moment. How did you come to create what a walk might entail for you? I love the idea of just meet up and let's see if it has wings and where does it go from here? What is it like when you lead someone on a walk?
Yeah, that's a great question. And so, you know, the first one I did, I totally winged it, right? I okay, this is what this is about. Here, let's have this is the poem I found. This is a snack, you know, look at this tree. It was homegrown. I had done a yoga teacher training. I had led, while I was in college, I led high school students on nature trips, you know, so I had little kind of my own set of tools. And I had my own experience of going to nature. I didn't know a right way or a wrong way. And that to me is I still believe that there's no right or wrong way to go to nature. And that each of us has our own way. And that where we are right now as a society is we've forgotten how to go to nature and to be in nature. So it's helpful to have someone who can guide us and remember us, remind us, and hold space for us. I would never say someone's forest bathing the wrong way, you know, and that's part of the practice, you know, everything's an invitation, take it or leave it. You know, you could always say, if you think this is all weird and just want to sit under a tree the whole time, that's fine. You're still getting all the benefits, you know.
You're still forest bathing in your own way. And you know what I hear in that first walk that you did, there is an expression among forest therapy guides or forest bathing guides that says the forest has your back.
Yeah.
And I'm hearing you being in complete trust with the forest, in partnership to do whatever might have come to you in that time and begin to experiment with maybe what you love doing, what you felt worked well, and to create something for yourself, begin to create something for yourself that would be your forest bathing experience.
Yeah. And every time I went to the forest, I would learn something new. Sometimes from the forest itself, sometimes from someone who would come by and say oh, did you know that's edible? Or oh, look at this. And so over time, I really say the forest taught me and led me, and that, you know, I got the messages I needed each time. And it started as this this little tiny seed of an idea. And it's grown into so much more, which has just been beautiful to witness. And also challenging in some ways, because I found that I can't put the same go, go, go on the club. Like if I try to force something, it won't necessarily work. But if I am listening and receptive and take back, things will start to unfold in ways that I couldn't have predicted.
I know Todd wants to ask a question, and before he does, with his permission, I get Shinrin-yoku and what the characters mean, the Japanese characters, and you may want to share that for the listening audience who's not aware. The phrase or the term forest bathing and forest therapy both seem a little sticky to have to explain, and I noticed that your inclination, your leaning is into forest bathing rather than using the term forest therapy, and I was wondering if you might say a little something about that, Julia.
Yeah, I love that. You know, when I first started, forest therapy didn't dawn on me. I just heard the term forest bathing, and so that's what I went with from the Japanese concept. And then over time, this concept of bathing has really felt important. And this idea of bathing in the forest atmosphere. In Japan, bathing is a big part of everyday life, and it's a big part of culture. The onsens and the communal baths, and I think so much of like the society actually focuses around this practice of bathing and washing ourselves and cleansing ourselves, and that's really what people say is like, I feel cleansed after a forest bath. And so I actually have been traveling right now, and I got Lyme disease again this spring, actually. Which now I have a deep relationship with this disease or this, and this tick. And I was able to say, okay, it's leading me on my path. Like, what is it asking of me? But what I felt really called was to hot springs. And so I've been traveling with my boyfriend, and we've been going to different hot springs all over Oregon, and I'm starting to feel a lot better. And then I was like, what is it in the hot springs? And then I came across this word called balneotherapy, which is treatment of disease through bathing. There's so much around this notion, and so I'm really all about the word bathing.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Wow, that's incredible about your Lyme disease being recurring there. I'm a type 1 diabetic, and I also think about things like, I would say, functional medicine and doing alternate healings with regards to my disease. So yeah, that means a lot to me that you're finding that. I'm wondering, I've done one forest bath. I did it it was just an amazing experience in Vietnam, in Dalat, Vietnam.
Wow.
Yeah. You don't think about Vietnam really having pine forests and things. I mean, I don't know if you do. I never did. But apparently it's very mountainous there in some areas, and there's just this beautiful forest. And a gentleman, Singaporean Chinese man by the name of Nicky Tay, shout out to Nicky, led this forest bath. It was just so deep and incredible. But also, I know there's probably people listening here like saying, well, I have a meditation practice, or, I take regular baths, and soak in the tub with a candle, What is a forest bath give one that you might not find in other, say, spiritual practices or other meditation type practices?
Yeah. So meditation is beautiful and so powerful, and it's an inward focused practice. You close your eyes and you go inside, and forest bathing is an outward focused practice. So it's about opening your eyes, and actually just not your eyes, we take in 80% of our information visually, and probably even more so in this day of screens and endless scrolling. I always lead people through a sensory awakening where you close your eyes and you let your other senses awaken. The sounds you can hear, what you can smell, what you can feel, what you can taste, what you can touch, and then opening your eyes again. And it's, it's a really simple practice, and it just takes maybe 10 minutes. And I always notice, maybe Linda, you've experienced this too, people are dropped in so deep after just the sensory awakening. And that to me is the beginning, the essence of a forest bath is awakening our senses. And then once we have our other senses awakened, we feel more, we can awaken the more subtle senses, like our sense of intuition and our heart sense, and start to let our hearts guide us. And we live in a culture too where we're so much in the head. And so when we're dropped into our hearts and letting ourselves follow our hearts, that's really changes the whole game. You know, I call it the superhighway to connection. I've been doing yoga since I was 15, but it wasn't until I learned how to connect to nature that all of these, you know, things that you read in spiritual books or learn it, hear a yoga teacher say, I didn't need to like learn it. I was experiencing it for myself.
I've only had one official forest bathing experience, and it was just so moving. And I happened to be there in Vietnam 50 years after my uncle had served in the U.S. Army in Vietnam. Mm-hmm. And I went to something called the War Remnants Museum in Ho Chi Minh City, and it just showed the devastation that the United States had inflicted upon the Vietnamese people. Not just shooting and bombing, but also chemical deforestation and removal of foliage that could get in the way of bombing people. I mean, it's just horrific. And I went from there to the next day to this forest bathing experience.
Wow.
And I was I think they were all native born Vietnamese people. And I just felt this grief and apology and sorrow, and like, we all shared in this experience, and at the end we all shared with each other. It was just beyond grieving and healing and moving. It was just like this whole cosmic experience. Why am I here 50 years after my uncle was here with these people from Vietnam, asking for their forgiveness, you know, crying? How can we be so inhumane to each other? I felt like we were all there in the forest, with the forest, teaching us this lesson. So that was like deep enough. Now I'm going, okay, if that's my first forest bathing experience, you know, what do subsequent forest bathing experience have in store for me? And what do you find, Julia? Is there a general first time like hit that people get and then it deepens over time, or do you just kind of get something different every time you go?
It's funny that you bring up grief. Obviously, that is a specific experience being in Vietnam, but a lot of times when we connect to nature, we feel grief. We feel the grief. I think there's a lot of grieving to be done at this moment on this planet. A lot of times we're not letting ourselves feel it. And so when we do give ourselves the space, and we have the space to slow down and to connect and feel, like that's the other thing. Joanna Macy says that patriarchy relies on a stiff upper lip. And so when we're in Mother Earth, when we're in this nature, when we're in this feeling space, like, and we feel and we cry, and there's a lot of grieving, and that is the first part of the healing that's needed on this planet. No doubt we're in, you know, someone said end times, and they said, if that sounds dramatic, like, you know, there's some species of whales where there's 8 left. Like, it is end times for a lot of species. And going to a forest bath, for me, it's like it's a portal. It might be the first step. And then people say, how often do I need to do this? And then that's where their science comes in. And there's like, okay, 15 minutes of being in the forest will give you an immune boost that lasts up to 2 weeks. 1 minute of looking at the tree will increase your sense of awe. And what I found personally is that I need some kind of nature connection every day to keep this connection going. And then I started doing something called a forest Sabbath, Saturdays in nature. And then times in my life where I need to go deeper into nature. And that's actually, for me, it's happening. I feel like it's almost shifting where I'm spending more time in these like deep nature connected spaces. And then I come in the liminal, and then I come back out into the other world, and I'm back in the you know. And I don't know if that's for everyone, but that's where I'm spending a lot more time. You know, if forest bathing is this first like wake up call in some ways, maybe the first forest bath, I think it'll be different for everyone. Some people might be okay just going back to normal lives. Some people might want to incorporate nature, have a garden, have plants. It's really a shift in the way you're thinking. Like when you're drinking a glass of water, you're connected to nature because all of water of the whole planet is connected. Yeah, so it really depends. But what I found is that the more I go on my journey of nature connection, the more I'm questioning everything about how to live on this planet. What foods to eat, what clothes to buy, how to travel, like, and it's really like, it starts to come closer to like a rewilding. Like, how do we live fully in better relationship with the earth?
And I felt that rewilding in your book, which I loved. More of a daily practice, more of a lifestyle to be connected with nature, as opposed to just walking through it or being in it. And again, no one gets to be wrong for how they spend time in the forest. Often I see someone walking through and they're walking at a very quick pace. They may have earbuds in, or they may have a cell phone in their hand and with the music or the radio playing. And I appreciate that they're in the forest, and yet they're not with the forest. And that so much is happening around them. Part of what's sensory, part of what's slowing down. When I lead walks, it's what's in motion when it isn't you. So if you're moving quickly through the forest, what's happening around you? And that slowing down, I think, is something that's certainly very different for the American public, the American forest bathers. But making it a beautiful way to live your life in connection with nature is what I got from your book. So that leads me to ask something I know I've come up against is, so why can't I just go out in the forest on my own? What's the value of having a guide? And I get that it's a both and, but I would love to hear how you would respond to something like that, or what your take on that is.
We've forgotten how to be in nature as a society. And there are those who remember, and there are those who have been trained, to remember how to help others remember. So that's the benefit of a guide. It's just helpful, right? Like, you can definitely do a yoga class, do a yoga practice by yourself, and that's great. But sometimes you go to a yoga class and I would never have thought of doing it this way. Or just being in a container, a space where someone else is holding you, and you don't have to worry about like the timing or, the sequence. Someone else is there supporting you. And I think that's a huge piece is the support. And someone else who's like, I'm going to bring the tea and I'm going to bring the snacks, and I know this route and I know what you should be aware of if there's any things to be aware of at this time. And I have extra layers, in case it gets cold or starts to rain, because there's also that piece of nature as the unknown, nature as something scary. For those of us who were lucky enough to establish a connection to nature as children, going to nature, we always have that relationship throughout our whole life. And more people are growing up in urban places and without that opportunity to establish that connection. And so nature might feel like a dangerous or a scary place. And so it's much harder to develop that connection as an adult, but still so important. We in modern life try to control everything, our climates, and we create the semblance of control, whereas nature is this mysterious. We don't know what could happen, which is, ultimately we never know, but the veil is lifted in nature, where there's a lot more that we don't know, that it's helpful to have someone who has more experience to guide.
I like your comparison to yoga or even meditation. There's also another piece, if I can, to build on what you said, that very often as individuals, we have the best intentions to do just that, to go out into the forest and connect with a tree or breathe deeply and just, take in the sunshine. And without the presence of the guide, often we don't. At the end of the day, you think, well, maybe tomorrow I'll go out and do that. So even the benefit of a yoga class where that at 8 o'clock every morning or 8 o'clock every evening, there's a group of people holding space for you, and this beautiful intention that you have to be heart-centered or nature-focused, I think is a compelling thing and helps a lot of people, myself included, when I was doing yoga, to know that I had a place that I could go and they were waiting for me.
Yeah.
And so I didn't want to let them down, and I didn't want to let myself down about what my very best intentions wanted. So I like that comparison.
Yeah. And I love that. And I want to add that, nature connection is a deeply personal practice for each person to develop based on where they are and how they grew up. And when you do it in a group and in community, there's something more that happens, right? I always find that, we go out and there's an invitation and people go out and they connect to a tree or they do something and we come back. And when you share, I always say, like, it's for you. You don't have to share. But when you do, it's a gift for everyone. Because we have these experiences that maybe one-off we can dismiss, right? Or like, oh, maybe that's nothing. But when you hear someone else say it, you're like, wow, okay. So, I really did have that conversation with a tree. Okay. I like to say that everyone has little pieces of the puzzle. We don't all see the whole thing. And so what someone might notice and share deepens everyone else's experience. And then also when you are in a place of deep connection with nature and yourself, you're also in deep connection with community, and people can, their heart open and they can go deeper, and you can actually really feel connected to other humans, which is such an important part of this healing too.
And Julia, the last part of that is, I don't know if you experience this. I hear a lot of people say, I'm so glad we're doing this because I don't want to walk alone. And that's a safety reason.
Yeah. Yeah. And then I think of the more like spiritual walk alone, like this idea of that we're all walking each other home, and when you're doing this kind of, I love what you said, sacred activism. When you're doing this work of sacred activism, it can feel lonely and it can feel like you're up against the whole world, right? Like all of these big forces of capitalism and consumerism and doingism. When you're with others, you're like, okay, I'm not alone. I'm not crazy.
Yeah, it's along those lines. And also you mentioned, living in the liminal, which I love that expression. Or for me, I feel like, okay, I go have my forest bath and I have that experience. And now I come back to my real life, and those kinds of experiences like politics, the news, have to get a job, have to earn money, the whole, I don't really like the word patriarchy, but the patriarchal system. How has forest bathing and other experiences you've had seeped into or become your whole life? And what do you do about, things like politics and things like what's going on in the world that you see on the news? And specifically, I want to ask you about politics of the Amazon rainforest and other ecological ecocide problems going on right now, how the forest might be informing you to kind of live your life in a way that is meaningful and maybe, to quote Charles Eisenstein, is moving towards the more beautiful world our hearts know is possible.
Yeah, so I come from a family of news junkies. My sister is a reporter. She's actually an amazing reporter. She lives in Palm Springs and writes for the Desert Sun and is doing a lot of immigration work. And my dad, is always up to the latest. Like, I talk to my dad, it's like reading the newspaper. He tells me exactly what's happening, all of the, the politics and just like the latest news. And I grew up in a family where we read the newspaper every morning with breakfast. I've gotten to this point now where there's just so much information. What is real? What do we trust? And it's just information overload to the point that we're not able to think for ourselves or be clear on the bigger picture. Some of us need to be able to step back to see the bigger picture and then bring that forward. I joke that, I'm not on Twitter, but I tweet for the trees. They're the way that they spread information. It's not as much news, but you get information. You get real deep, the depths of it all. Yeah, and also it's still important to be somewhat informed of what's happening day to day. And, there's so many digests you can read, and so there's ways to get information without being like paralyzed by all this information. I was talking this with the fires in the Amazon, and someone saying, no, the Amazon is not the lungs of planet Earth. Well, to the people who live there, it is the lungs of planet Earth, right? Like it's the lungs of their home, and trees are how the Earth breathes. And so it's less about like the science semantics of it and more like what is really going on here.
We talked a little bit about, or a lot, about how, what can we get out of a forest bathing experience or a regular connection with nature. I'm wondering if you have a sense or feeling or information download about what the forest gets, what trees get, what nature gets from us humans.
Yeah, beautiful. The Earth is sharing a lot of messages with us right now. It's just getting louder and louder, and so we're forced to pay attention, right? And I think that's what's been happening with climate change, is like it's just going to keep coming in and keep getting louder, And so I think just listening, when we actually just take the time to listen, is really powerful. And I think the Earth she likes to be witnessed for her beauty. She likes to be thanked for everything that she provides. Many indigenous cultures talk about the original instructions for living on planet Earth. And I remember being at the Native American Museum at the Smithsonian in Washington, D.C., and it's striking me that these tribes that had no contact with each other, that were, across the planet from each other, all had the same basic understanding of how to live in right relations with the Earth. And that, and I talk about these original instructions, and someone asked me, where can I find them? Where are they? And the original instructions are written deep inside the Earth, and they're inside our hearts. It's when we spend time with nature in a intentional, conscientious way that we start to be able to hear and understand and embody these original instructions once again.
That's beautiful. I love that. Over the last couple of years, Julia, are you seeing any trends or, I'm not even going to qualify it. I'm just going to put a question mark at the end of that. Are you seeing any changes or any differences in the forest bathers from, say, 3 or 4 years ago to today?
That's a great question. 3 or 4 years ago, when I mentioned forest bathing, people, they might have had that starry-eyed look in their eyes, like I want that, what is it? But they hadn't really heard it. And it's just gotten so mainstream so quickly, and I'm so grateful for all the work of many organizations and forest therapy guides who have been a part of this, about making it, a more mainstream thing pretty quickly. Kaiser Permanente wrote an article on the benefits of it. And what's so amazing is we are at this time where there's so much science that backs up the benefits too, that helps people come to the forest, that helps people get there. And then once they get there, that's where the magical healing happens. And then as far as the people, as the world is getting more complex, I think there is like a speeding up and a sense of urgency in this work and the people who come looking for it. And also like a wanting for more, so if forest bathing is this beautiful practice of connecting to nature, lowering your anxiety and your stress, but it's like, what more can we do?
And I believe making the forest personal is one of the greatest things that any of us can do, because once something is personal, we don't compartmentalize it, saying something like, oh, well, that's happening to someone else, or that's in the rainforest. I don't know what that has to do with me. I'll be walking along somewhere and I'll see a tree that someone connected with, and I'll snap a picture and shoot them a text and says, your tree says hi. And I'll get a response back and like, oh my gosh, I have to go see my tree. And so that personal aspect of forest bathing that I think most people come away with, having slowed down and opened their senses, there's something in that the next time they see a headline that says there are fires burning in the Amazon or in Africa, they're going to think about what that was like standing in the forest, standing like a tree, being with the trees, rather than just walking through them. And there may be action or there may not be, and yet it's experiencing it on a very different level. It's not just, how much can we tolerate in the news at the end of the day? And then we go to sleep and we start all over again the next morning. So I do think it's sacred work. I do think it's a very gentle activism that someone who takes people into, whether it's the rainforest or a forest or an arboretum, is doing these days for humanity and for the forest. Mm-hmm. To Todd's point about what does the forest get from it.
Yeah.
I'm curious, just a little bit of an aside, but have you seen the Netflix series, The OA?
No, what's that?
I recommend this to all my friends. It's
okay.
Produced and written by a woman named Britt Marling and her partner, Zal Manglij.
Uh-huh.
I hope I'm not destroying his name, but anyway, it's a 2-season series. It took a long time to produce and make, but in that second season, they have this episode. It's about the tree internet. And she basically falls out of this window into this grove of trees and experiences the tree internet. So
wow.
The trees capture her, and you see this energy go down into the mycelium and then just kind of spread around the whole world. And then the whole world of trees communicates to her. And I'm like wondering, about that for you. I mean, I know in a specific location you're receiving information, but do you also have the experience of like a whole kind of worldwide connection that you've accessed? Or they say that every tree is connected really to every other tree in some way or another, but do you have that as an experience?
Well, first, when you were recommending that Netflix series, what came to mind was I've been recommending The Overstory. It's a book where trees are the main character and connection of nature, and it's fiction, but I'm like, this is my experience of when I'm in this. It felt so real and so true. So that's something I've definitely been recommending to people. I think what happens is the more time we spend in nature, the more connected we are. Our empathy grows, right? So if you're disconnected, you might you might feel scarcity, and you might feel like, got to take care of yourself, right? And the next level is take care of your immediate family. And then the next level is your community. And then the next level is your country. And the next level is actually there's no borders and everyone's connected. And the next level is actually we're all connected to nature. Actually all of nature, and it kind of just grows and grows and grows until all of a sudden, the forest fire in the Amazon is as personal as what's happening in your backyard. There is no separation.
Yeah, I love that. Have you been to the Amazon before?
Never.
From what I know, I haven't either. But from what I hear from Lynn Twist and other people that have been there, it's not even really a relationship between the Achuar and the indigenous people and nature. They just are nature. They see themselves as an expression of nature, not like we're in relationship with this thing called nature. We are nature. We're in a culture that almost seems impossible to re-achieve that kind of being nature. I mean, there's a lot invested in not nature and endless growth cycles, all these things that are designed to extract from nature and build human artifice. I'm kind of thinking we can't go back to the Achuar unless there's global catastrophe and we're just forced into this, hunter-gatherer system again. But there must be some kind of blending of what humans have achieved in terms of scientific and what I would call typical progress, and what you're experiencing and we're all, I think, trying to experience, which is this communication with nature. Am I onto something thinking that nature grew us to go through this phase of all this evolution, and not just natural evolution, but hierarchical evolution? And even when you go through slavery and genocide and wars and threat of nuclear catastrophe, is this some kind of thing that nature has grown and we are on this precipice maybe that nature brought us to, and now we're going to work with nature into some other form that we won't even recognize? Is this making any sense to you?
Yeah. Yeah, and what comes to mind is Joanna Macy, who big influential elder for me. She talks about the knife's edge of uncertainty. This idea that if we say like someone else will figure it out, there's not going to be a catastrophe, right? We're not going to do anything. If we say the world's ending, there's no hope, we're not going to do anything. But it's riding that knife's edge of uncertainty is what we're being called to do. And that is what actually propels evolution forward. Another framework that she talks about is the 3 stories of our time. You know, there's business as usual, which is this like force of capitalism and consumerism, which I used to think it was a lot more solid than it is. And now I'm actually like, you know, it's a pretty fragile system. And so I think a lot of this like default, like, oh, this is never going to go away. Like I'm starting to see a lot of holes in it, you know, like it's not going to last. Like it just can't. Like the way that we're extracting from the earth, it just can't last. The way that these growth cycles, the industrial food, like there's just no way that, you know, to me, it's a matter of timing. Anyways, there's business as usual, which is just keeping this momentum going more and more and more. There's the great unraveling, which is like everything's ending, back to hunter-gatherer, and like species are dying, you know, just everything on complex life on Earth is falling apart. And then there's the third, which is the great turning, which is the people who won't let the great unraveling be the last word, and who are actively working towards what you mentioned, Charles Einstein, the better world we know in our hearts are possible. You know, something that I've committed to is to be a part of the great turning, to have a role in it. And who knows what that'll look like, but it's something that I'm committed to.
That's just beautiful and inspiring, and I'm moved by that. Thank you.
Yeah, me too. I'm wondering if there is anything else to add that hasn't been said yet, Julia.
We've talked around this a lot, but in terms of how can I forest bathe, or what can I do in lieu of finding a forest therapy or guide or a forest bathing club in your community, or starting your own forest bathing club. I'm now actually offering a mentorship program for people who want to start their own branch of the club. One thing I always recommend is a sit spot, finding a place to just sit every day, whether it's for 5 or 20 minutes, and just go there. And I always recommend consistency in time. Like if you can do it in the morning every day, that helps the spot kind of know to be able to expect you, and allows that relationship to start to come back alive. And another one is to give offerings. Many, many cultures have practice of giving offerings to the earth. It can be as elaborate as a fire ceremony where you're giving flowers and chocolate, and through this idea of the Mayans, it's the fire is like the tongue of the earth. So when they do a fire ceremony, they feed the earth, right? It could be as humble as a prayer, a little bit of water from your water bottle, some bird seed, whatever it is, but getting into that practice of giving back. And I find that if I'm ever feeling scared or scarce or out of luck, the second I give an offering to the earth, it just shifts my whole way of being.
So how can people find you?
Forestbathing.club is the Forest Bathing Club website. There's contact information. You can also email forestbathingclub@gmail.com or on Instagram @forestbathingclub. And then I'm personally juliaplevin.com or @juliaplevin on Instagram. And it's a funny thing, right? Like, kind of what we're talking about these times, going online to get offline.
For sure. I want to quote you, if I may. You wrote in your book, forest bathing heals us so that we can heal the earth. The trees are begging us to slow down, listen, and feel. So more of that, please.
Mm-hmm.
So I want to thank everybody who's listening to this podcast. Todd and I are part of what we call the Pachacasters in the Pachamama Alliance Global Commons group community, And so we're delighted that we were able to spend some time with you today, Julia, and to spend some time together, which we don't always get to do. Todd, anything you'd like to say?
Yeah, Julia, thank you so much. And I don't know if, did we mention the title of your book, The Healing Magic of Forest Bathing? I highly recommend the book. I got so much out of reading it, and it's just such a joy to talk to you. I feel very moved by what you're doing, who you are, how you be. Thank you so much for being with us today. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you, Linda and Todd. It's such a pleasure to connect to you, and thank you for the work that you're doing. It takes all of us, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, that it does. Thanks, everybody. Until next time.